So now that we have a file project all set up, we're ready to make kind of we're going to bring in an image plane and set our concept image to it. So let's go ahead and create first a new camera. So panels perspective new. We're going to call that the shot cam. All right, and we'll go ahead and say we're going to make sure we're inside that camera. So panels perspective shot cam. So you know you're inside the shot cam. It says right here shot cam at the bottom of the screen. Tells me I have symmetry turned on, so I'm going to turn that off for a second. Off from my move tool. Okay, and I'm going to say view image plane import image. So that'll pull up this thing and it will say, well, where do you want to bring that? And you notice it goes straight to the source images directory. I don't currently have it saved there, so I'm going to make a copy of it from my reference. I'll just say copy, and I'll go to the the Maya source images directory, and we'll paste it right there. So it's in there, and there it appears, so we'll say open. So there's the image. It immediately comes in on an image plane. Let me jump into my regular perspective camera so you can kind of see. Here's the shot cam right there, right? And if I move it, the image plane rotates with it or moves with it. So it's basically locked to that camera. If I select the image plane, so I have the camera selected, and there's a node right here for the image plane. If I say looking through camera only, then versus looking in all views, looking through camera, I go panel perspective, and I say shot cam, I only see it here. Now, one thing that's going to be important is to make sure that the render image is the exact same size as the concept image here. So I want to turn on the resolution or the film gate. This is the film gate. Here's the resolution gate. And also have the gate mask turned on. You'll notice the gate mask of this resolution gate does not match the same of my image. And you'll see up here that resolution gate is set to 960 by 540. Obviously, it's not the same ratio or pixel dimension as my concept image. So I'm going to go into the concept image and open in Photoshop momentarily. We'll say open. It's going to let me open with. It will not, so I better just open Photoshop. And we'll load that image into there. Okay, so we'll say File, Open. Paste that directory, and there's the snow image. So by opening this up, I'm going to go look at it, say Image Adjustments. Image Size, and I click on Image Size, and it's going to tell me the pixels are 750 by 377. So 750, 377. Let's remember that. Jump back into Maya. I'm going to open up my render settings right here. This little slate with the cog. And under the common attributes, we're going to go down to frame image size. And we're going to say width 750, height 377. And now that matches perfectly with the image. So basically what happens is the resolution gate, when you click on this one, it's looking at your render image size. And once that has been set, then the resolution gate is obviously going to match. Now the film gate, we know that's the size of our actual film. When I'm doing these kind of images, it's nice for the film gate and resolution gate to actually be the same. So to make that match, I'm going to look at the device aspect ratio, which right now is going to say 1.989. Basically 2. It's basically a 2-to-1 ratio. So I'll now select my camera. So here's my shot cam. I'll come into the attribute editor, and for the shot cam shape node, which is right here, I'm going to come down and I'm going to find the film aspect ratio. And I basically want the device aspect ratio, which is the render settings, to match what the film aspect is. So I'll change that to 1.8 or 989. Hit enter. All right, and so now we'll have the film aspect ratio, or sorry, the film gate and the resolution gate are going to match. But then you notice the image back here does not match, or at least while the ratio might be the same, it seems to be shrunken down. So to adjust that, I'll come back to the image plane shape, and you'll have an option for placement under the image plane shape node. And right now it's set to best, but you can say fit to resolution gate or fit to film gate. Because my resolution and film gates are the same, clicking on either one of those two will be fine. So now you should have an image attached to your camera. We did that via the image plane, import image, right? And because this reference is in our source images directory, whenever we copy this Maya document online or to another disk or another computer, as long as we copy that entire Maya directory, we'll know we'll have this background image plane in it. So it's a little interesting or a little difficult, or gets a little getting used to tumble in your scene when you have an image plane attached to it in this manner. Because the image plane doesn't move, it's always locked to the camera. So even though I'm spinning around the grid, the image doesn't move. So just kind of understand that this is just locked to the camera. If I jump back into my perspective view, we'll turn back on visible in all views. You can basically see how that works. It's like, yeah, no matter how you move this camera, it's the image is not going to change. So here I am in ShotCam. And the point now is we want to set up this image, this perspective, to match the environment that we're about to work in. So we have to take a couple things into effect. One of them is our focal length. The other is how high off the ground is our camera so that our perspective lines up with it. And that's going to be kind of directly related to the focal length, or the length of the camera that we use. So focal length is something we talk in a digital sense. It's basically mimicking the focal length of a real camera in terms of, is it a long telephoto lens? Are we zooming in? Or have we zoomed out and used a wide lens, which would be like a wide angle, almost like a fisheye lens. Now Maya doesn't have the ability to do fisheye on an actual lens where you're going to get curved perspective, the same way a round lens would do that. But you can get really wide on the lens and get pretty drastic perspective changes. So to illustrate this, I'm just going to select my camera, go to the ShotCam shape, and the default is going to be 35, which is kind of mimicking a 35mm camera. So if I go wider and say 18, you'll notice it kind of backs out a little bit. It's a shorter lens, but if I zoom in back to where I was, you notice how strong that perspective is. There's a really forced perspective. It's almost like both vanishing points are within my field of view. If I bring this down to, say, an 80, now that's just basically like zooming in. I've zoomed in on what I currently had. So I'm going to have to move the camera back in space. And when I do, you'll notice the perspective is much shallower. Or, sorry, not shallower. The perspective has wider vanishing points, so the image itself, the perspective feels a little flatter. And you can look up online, if you just go to Google and you do a search for focal length. And here's a nice image right here. You can kind of see this is the same, the camera does not move. It's literally just zooming in. So that's one, that's a very, that's a good example of the length of the lens you're using. And how basically you're zooming in, and when that happens, things feel a little flatter. The depth of the scene doesn't feel quite as vast. However, if you do a focal length, let's just try portrait, I think will give us. Here, what the camera is actually doing is it's giving you different lenses, but in order to keep the subject's face the same size, when they use a long lens, the camera actually has to move back in space. And when using a shorter lens, they have to move up in space. So the distance of the camera to the subject is changing for each one of these images. And you'll notice how on the 135, the subject perspective feels much flatter. whereas on the 24, the features feel almost distorted. And you can find basically a wedge test between the 24 and the 135. Each step, the face begins to feel more and more flat. So when you're looking at your concept image, you have to kind of make a judgment about, am I using a longer lens or a shorter lens? And the shorter lens is going to feel much more vast, and you're going to have really objects getting forward, looking really large, and objects moving back getting really small. In this scene, I can tell that these trees back here, they don't feel really that small. And while I have a nice foreground framing element, it doesn't feel exceptionally large in comparison to, say, these ones growing out of the snow over here. So I can make an assumption that the focal length is pretty moderate, a little bit longer. Your eye, it's approximately like a 50 or 55 millimeter lens in Maya. So here we're already zooming in more than the human eye at an 80. I think I might start with an 80, maybe even 100 to try and lock in this scene. And so now I'll start to line up this grid and make it feel like this is the ground plane for my scene. Now, one thing that's important to do with this image plane is that if I start to zoom out too far, you'll see my image plane starts to disappear. Let's look at my perspective view, and you'll notice so with the now that we kind of see the grid going through there, we understand that the ground or the image plane needs to move farther back. Well, if I actually just moved it back, nothing's going to move. Image planes are a little different. You can't just select them and move them like that. At least not this image plane. So what you want to do is come into your select the camera, go to the image plane shape node, and you have this placement, and you can change the depth, which basically determines how far away it is. So you have two options. One option is to go deeper in space, so we'll just turn it to 500, and now you see the image plane has actually moved back. It's gotten larger, and that is because it needs to still fill the frame. So if I go back into my shot cam, it needs to stay inside the frame and fit that perfectly. That's not going to change from this vantage point. However, what you will notice is the grid now doesn't disappear until I go really far away. So this gives me some more space to play with this grid and try to line up the perspective properly for the scene. Now the other option is you can grab this image plane, you can make the depth really shallow, say like 20, and that way the image plane is in front of your scene. Perspective, shot cam. So I don't see the grid at all. However, you can change the image plane color settings. So right here on the top of the image plane attributes, I can turn down the color gain off the offset, but I can turn down the alpha gain, and the alpha gain basically is the transparency of the image. So this way, I can reduce the contrast, and kind of the image plane is there, it's just not so prominent that I can't see through it. So this is either way, it doesn't matter. You're just trying to set up a scene so that we can see the geometry of the grid either behind or in front of the image. And I'll show you a couple of, one thing I do like to do is I'll set a keyframe on the alpha gain. So I'll right click on alpha gain and say set key. You actually have to right click on that. You can't just hit the letter S because it won't know that that's what you're trying to key. So set the actual alpha gain by right click, set key. Then I'll come to frame 20 and I'll make that brighter like frame 1. And I'll say right click, set key. Let's go back to like 0 actually here, set key. So now when I scrub back and forth my timeline, I'll select those all, right click and turn those tangents to linear. So now you can kind of see I get a nice, it's very easy for me to toggle, hey, I don't want to see my image, or I do want to see my image. Just like that. All right. So with this now set, I'm kind of ready to start blocking in my scene. I think this is where I want my perspective to be. Let me check a little bit more here. I think that's pretty good. Maybe something about there. Alright, so now with that set, I'm going to lock my camera momentarily. That way I don't accidentally move this. And now I'm going to start creating some geometry to block into the scene.